Tonight we're going to talk about lies in the textbooks. One of my few idiosyncrasies is I collect public school textbooks. I have hundreds of them. I just brought a few with me tonight. Since I taught biology and earth science and physical science for years, it's always been fascinating to me to study these books and see how different people, present the subject. And so we're going to talk about some of the lies in the textbooks. I think one of the most important things in my seminar is this session. We're going to try to cover a lot more material than normal, though, about what's in these textbooks anyway. I start off in my seminar giving an illustration to make the point. I'll give it here so you can see how this fits in perspective. It has always amazed me, after teaching school for 15 years, how two people can look at the same thing and come to opposite conclusions of what they're seeing. Two people look at Grand Canyon. They're both looking at the same canyon. And one of them says, "Wow, look what the Colorado River did for millions and millions of years." The Bible-believing Christian stands there, looks at the same canyon, and says, "Wow, look what the flood did in about 30 minutes. It's just a matter of how you want to look at it. Same canyon, two different ways to look at it. Textbook says, over millions of years, the Colorado River has carved the Grand Canyon from solid rock. Now just hold on a second. Does he know that or does he think that? He doesn't know that. He thinks it took millions of years to form the Grand Canyon. I do debates all the time. Last night on the show, we were on the radio all night long till 4 in the morning. Several of the folks that called in were talking about, oh, Grand Canyon took millions of years to form. No, it didn't take millions of years to form. I tell them in the debates, this one professor said, obviously, Mr. Hovind, it took millions of years to make the Grand Canyon. I said, well, sir, did you know if you built a dam across Grand Canyon, a huge lake would fill in behind it, covering several states. I mean, it would be a gigantic lake. Of course, it would take a lot of dirt to fill in the canyon, but still, it would back up a giant lake behind it. This picture with the white shows, that's what's called the snow line. Between these two red lines is what's called the Kaibab uplift. Now, Grand Canyon, it cuts right across the middle of a ridge, sort of like a long, narrow mountain called a ridge. If you push the carpet up against the wall, it would wrinkle. That would make a ridge. Grand Canyon is a slice right across a ridge called the Kaibab uplift, K-A-I-B-A-B, Kaibab. The top of the Kaibab uplift, that ridge, is roughly 7,000 or 8,000 feet above sea level, way up there. Now the bottom of the canyon where the river is only 1,800 feet above sea level, so it's more than 1 mile deep. Absolutely gigantic canyon. How many of you have ever seen the Grand Canyon? Huge hole in the ground, unbelievable. 180 or 200 miles long between those two red lines. This is a picture from a satellite. The river enters the canyon up at the far right corner at 2,800 feet above sea level. And the river flows down to the bottom and left is the way it would flow from this angle here. So what we have here, as the river enters the canyon, it flows downhill, of course, and ends up at 1,800 feet above sea level. It drops about 1,000 feet. During that time, the ground is rising up. The Kaibab uplift is going uphill. Interesting. So I told this professor in this debate one time, I said, sir, did you know the top of the canyon is higher than the bottom? He said, yeah. I said, did you know the river only runs through the bottom? He said, so? I said, sir, the top of the canyon is higher than where the river enters the canyon by over 4,000 feet. Rivers don't flow uphill. There's no delta. Where's all the mud that washed out of there? Usually when a river cuts through, makes a canyon or something, and all the mud that washes out is out at the outside. It flattens out into a delta. No delta for the Grand Canyon. There's no way that river made that canyon. The flood made Grand Canyon. Probably in a few weeks. Certainly not millions of years. See, while the sediment layers were soft after the flood, the water could erode that very quickly. Probably Grand Canyon formed within a few years after the flood, because the Bible says in Psalm 104, the mountains arose, the valleys sank down, and the water rushed off. During this time, probably huge lakes were trapped by the mountains lifting up, and it would take several weeks or months or years for that lake to overflow its own, find the lowest point, and overflow and make a spillway, and carve out Grand Canyon very quickly. Most of the river basins in the world were probably formed as the floodwater ran off during the last few months of the flood or during the first few years afterwards. There would be drainage patterns would have to be established, and as the water soaks out of the ground, gradually the ground would dry out and form the mountains and the rock layers that we have today. Okay, the Grand Canyon is what we call a washed out spillway. Have you ever seen a farmer's built a dam on his property like Grandpa has on his property up there in Arkansas? If the water goes over the top of the dam, it'll find the lowest point and start going over that spot. Once it starts going through, it cuts a little groove, and then more water is rushing through, so it cuts the groove deeper and wider, so more water comes through. Especially if you have a lot of debris like sand and gravel and rocks and tree stumps and trees, it becomes like liquid sandpaper. It goes rushing through and carves the canyon out just in a hurry. And we'll get into more of that on video number 6 about the flood, what caused that. Anyway, Grand Canyon is simply a breached dam. It was not formed by the Colorado River. So you need to be able to give for the quiz some reasons why we know the Grand Canyon could not have been formed by the Colorado River. There's no delta. The top is higher than the bottom. Those would be too good enough right there. But the rivers don't flow uphill. Okay. Does anybody know what this machine is? This farmer's holding? This is a calf puller. It's a come-along, a block and tackle, or come-along attached to a pole. Once in a while, a cow has a hard time having that baby calf, and so they get the calf puller out, hook the cable around the calf's legs, and jack the calf out of the cow. You get a few thousand pounds of pressure on there, that calf comes right out, no problem. Well, one day this farmer was out pulling a calf with a calf puller. It was a breech birth. That means the back feet were coming out first. That's not good. Normally calves are born head first. But this one, the back feet are coming out first. So the farmer had the calf puller out there and had the cable wrapped around the calf's back legs, and he's trying to pull the calf out of the cow. And a city fella stopped his car to see what on earth is going on. And the farmer said, "Come here, man, I need some help." He said, "I don't know nothing about cows." He said, "Just come give me a hand, would you?" He said, "Okay." So the city fella hopped out of the car, jumped over and helped the farmer pull the calf. He never said a word. He just did what he was told. Well, about 10 minutes later, the calf is fine and the mother's fine, and so they're walking up to the barn, going to get washed up, and the farmer said, "Man, I want to thank you for helping me." The city fellow said, "Oh, I was glad to help, glad to help." The farmer said, "Have you ever seen anything like this before?" The city fellow said, "No, sir, I've never seen nothing like this." The farmer said, "Well, do you have any questions?" He said, "Yes, sir. I got one question. It's been bugging me for 10 minutes. The farmer said, "Well, what's your question?" The city fellow said, "How fast do you figure that calf was going when it ran into that cow?" No, 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 fella. We are not separating the wreck here. How fast was that calf going? Two people looking at the same thing, and one of them's getting a wrong idea of what's going on. Boy, the Bible warned us that was going to happen. In 2 Peter chapter 3, it says, "Knowing this first, there shall come in the last days scoffers." There are people that scoff at the Bible. And it says they're going to walk after their own lust, and they're going to say, "Where is the promise of His coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation." Now that's an important verse. We don't ask you to memorize too many verses for our class here, but I want you to memorize 2 Peter 3:3, 3:4, and 3:5. And we'll put those on the test here. 2 Peter 3:3, 3:4, and 3:5. 3:4 says, the scoffers are going to say, "Where is the promise of His coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were." That's a very important phrase. What that means is, the scoffers are going to say, the way things are happening now is the way they've always been happening. For instance, they look at Grand Canyon, big old huge slice in the rock, and they notice the river running across the bottom is eating rocks off the bottom. It's eroding it, making it deeper. So they study the canyon for 20 years and say, we calculated over a 20-year span that the Grand Canyon gets deeper about 1/8 of an inch every year. The rock is being worn off. That's probably true. I wouldn't argue about that. And they'll say, "See, this canyon is, 6,000 feet deep and at 1/8 of an inch a year. That proves it's, X number zillion years old." Now hold it. You're assuming that what you're watching now, 1/8 of an inch per year, is what's always happened. Right there is the faulty assumption. 99% of that canyon was formed in a couple days, and the last 1% has been happening over the last 4,400 years since the flood. But they assume what we see today is is the way it's always been happening down through history. That is called uniformitarianism, which would be a word you need to know. We'll get into that in a second. I'll put it up on the board here. The scoffers, the Bible says, will be willingly ignorant of how God made the heavens and the earth standing out of the water and in the water. We covered that in the previous sessions about what the original creation was like, how that the earth was made with a canopy of water overhead, and it was in the water and out of the water. And the scoffers are ignorant of the flood, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. This world was destroyed by a flood. And the scoffers don't want to admit there was a flood because that means, you know, God has the authority to judge His creation. And He does, folks. This is His world. He can wreck it if He wants. Well, one of the scoffers in the last days was a fellow named James Hutton. In just about every science book, you read something about James Hutton. He lived in the late 1700s. He wrote a book in 1795 where he said, I think the earth is much older than everybody says. Now you need to understand the history here. In the late 1700s, of course we had our American Revolution, the English call it the Rebellion. We had our revolution in 1776 and rebelled against, you know, King George, threw the tea in the harbor, making it unsuitable even for the British to drink. And in 1795, James Hutton wrote his book and said, I think the earth is millions of years old. Now, during this time, almost everybody in America, at least, and in the Western world, believed the Bible. They were strongly influenced by Christianity, and most everybody believed the earth was about 6,000 years old. So James Hutton comes along and says, I think it's, you know, millions of years old. Well, that was a pretty new thought, and not many folks believed it. Also during this time of the end of the 1700s and early 1800s, there were many revolutions going on. There were countries rebelling against the idea of a monarchy, a king. We had the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Spanish, the Polish, the Italian, the German. What was happening was people were throwing off the king as a form of government. Now, the Tsar in Russia was the equivalent to a king up until 1917, right? Russia kind of escaped this. They kept their monarchy intact, you know, long after the European revolutions were going on, but many countries were having revolutions to get rid of the king. They thought, like, you know, we ought to have a different form of government called a democracy. And here the Bible says you should honor the king. And so some people thought the Bible was an obstacle to their political objectives. So, like this textbook says, many people thought the earth was only a few thousand years old. But in the 1700s, a Scottish scientist named James Hutton estimated the earth was much older. He used the principle of uniformitarianism. There's the word you need to know. Uniformitarianism means the way things are happening now is the way they've always been happening. The slogan is often put like this: the present is the key to the past. And that's what they say. Uniformitarian means the present is the key to the past. In other words, if Grand Canyon is getting deeper a little bit every year, well, then that's the way it's always been happening. Actually, the Bible is the only reliable key to the past. But one of these scoffers, James Hutton, wrote his book, and he kind of developed this idea of uniformitarianism. Now, a young lawyer from Scotland named Charles Lyell read that book and became very influenced by it. Charles Lyell, and you need to know his name, Charles Lyell, the Scottish lawyer, hated the Bible. He lived in the early 1800s. He read James Hutton's book and was influenced by it. Charles Lyell wrote this book, Principles of Geology. I've got all 3 volumes of his all thoroughly marked up in my library. But in this book, written in 1830, Charles Lyell is the primary fellow responsible for developing what is called the geologic column. And in his book, he mocks Scripture. Now you have to understand, during the early 1800s, most people believed the Bible, so you had to be careful if you were going to attack the Bible. You didn't just come out and blast it like the atheist did last night on the radio program, you know, and the calls you got last night, Marlissa, on the skeptics calling in saying, oh, you're so stupid to believe the Bible. Back in 1800, man, you didn't do that, because just, 99% of the population believed the Bible. So you would blast Christians and you wouldn't have any friends left. So the way he did it was interesting. He used scoffing to scoff at the Scripture. For instance, on page 30 he said, they reach false conclusions and futile reasoning and ancient doctrines sanctioned by the implicit faith of many generations and supposed to rest on scriptural authority. This is a backhanded way of poking fun at the Scriptures for those idiots who dare to believe the Bible. He said on page 41, this other guy remarked how much the interests of religion, now watch this phrase carefully, the interests of religion as well as those of sound philosophy had suffered. In other words, religion and sound philosophy suffer when you mix them together. What's he trying to say here? You mean you can't have religion and believe the Bible and also have sound philosophy? That's what he's trying to imply by perpetually mixing up the sacred writings with questions in physical science. Here is where, and they do this today, they try to make it look like the Bible and science cannot be put together. Well, no, the Bible and science get along fine. The Bible and evolution do not get along fine. But by saying the Bible and science don't get along, they're trying to imply that evolution is part of science, and it's not. 41, he reasoned philosophically against those who regarded the disordered state of Earth's crust as exhibiting signs of the wrath of God for the sins of man. And of course, if you look at the world from a biblical perspective, you see the flood in the Bible, and you look at the Grand Canyon, you say, wow, that's the wrath of God for the sins of man. But some people don't want you to look at the world and see the wrath of God for man's sin, because then you might end up getting saved. And so the devil has got a lot of folks looking at Grand Canyon saying, wow, that took millions of years of evolution. And that way they miss an important object lesson to remind them of the wrath of God on the sins of man. So Lyle here is mocking this idea. He talked about religious prejudices. You know, if you believe the Bible, you're prejudiced. He said, men of superior talent, he's talking about himself, who thought for themselves. Now what does he mean by this? If you think for yourself, you will be of superior talent. And he said, and they were not blinded by authority like the Bible. This is another one of those backhanded jabs trying to say, well, if you believe the Bible, you don't know how to think for yourself. And I get that every week in debates and in call-in talk shows and stuff with us. Oh, you believe the Bible, you don't know how to think for yourself, huh? Well, yes, I do know how to think for myself. And I think I've studied it very carefully, and the Bible is absolutely right. Simple as that, okay? Lyle said his goal was to free the science from Moses. What's he mean by that, you think? Most scientists in this time were Christians. They thought science got along just fine with the Bible. Lyle said he wanted to free science from Moses. In other words, you know, get rid of this idea of a flood and a creation. Let's put millions of years in here. That's what Lyle wanted to do. Okay, scientists who thought that Archbishop Usher's estimate, or even 10 times this, was an immense length of time, were in for a rude shock when they started looking closely at the solid part of the earth. Oh, there's another backhanded stab at the Bible. In other words, yeah, you might believe the Bible's true, but when you really look at science, you'll find out it's not. And there are professors today that do the same thing to their students. They're going to say, oh, you believe the Bible, huh? Well, by the time you get done with this class, we'll show you the truth. That's just the attitude they have. That science doesn't go along with Scripture, but it certainly does. Lyle, in the early 1800s, developed, along with some other fellows, he developed the geologic column. How many have ever heard of the geologic column before? This was the time when they divided the earth up into layers, you know, Cenozoic, Mesozoic, Paleozoic, Archaeozoic, and all this stuff. They further divided it into different periods like the Jurassic, the Cretaceous, Jurassic, Triassic. Each of these names, most of these names, comes from a section in England, like the Devonian, for instance. There's a Devonshire, England. I believe it's called Devonshire, and they named it after that section. Most of the names come from a section of England where they were digging around finding these layers of, you know, chalk or something. Cretaceous, Cretia, means Latin for chalk. And so they find a layer of chalk, and they call that the Chalk Age, the Cretaceous Age. I don't know what the rest of them mean, but you can look it up in any dictionary. But each of these layers was assigned, during this 1800s, a name, an age, and an index fossil. How many saw the movie Jurassic Park, named after the Jurassic layer? Did they have that in Ukraine, Jurassic Park movie? Did you see this? No? Oh, scary movie. Did you see it, Tanya? You haven't seen it either? I think we have it. You can take it home and watch it. You'd enjoy that. The layers then were assigned an age and a name and an index fossil. Now this is very important. This was all done during the early 1800s. This geologic column is the Bible for the evolutionist. It can only be found one place in the world. The only place you can find the geologic column is in the textbooks. In the textbooks they talk about, here's an earth science textbook, about how, you know, during the Cenozoic and Mesozoic and Paleozoic era, they've got it all figured out like, wow, this is, you know, millions of years old, and it's just simple baloney. The geologic column cannot be found in the world. Most places are missing about 70% of the geologic column. No place in the world contains all the geologic column in the right order. Now one professor I debated said, Mr. Hovind, we've got 26 places where we found the geologic column in order. I said, no, what you mean is you've got 26 places where you found the fossils in order that you expected. That's all. This textbook admits if there were a column of sediments, unfortunately, no such column exists. There is no geologic column. So that'll be a quiz question. Where can you find the geologic column? In the textbook. The only place it exists. Now, it is true the Earth has many layers. That's not the question. I've been to Grand Canyon and Royal Gorge. And remember Royal Gorge? We fired the airplane off of there, flew down for about 4 miles. I've been to lots of these canyons, been to all 50 states now, and I've been to Snake River Valley in Idaho a couple months ago. There's no question the Earth has layers. The question is, how did it get that way? Now, I want you to look at these layers in Grand Canyon and answer this question. If each of these layers is a different age, don't you think there'd be some erosion marks in between the layers? I mean, if the top layer sat there for 4 million years waiting for the next one, why aren't there some erosion marks in between the layers? So one of the quiz questions will be, what are some ways to show that the layers of Earth are not vastly different in ages? How do we know those two layers right on top of each other are not millions of years apart, even though the textbook says they are? Well, one way we know is there are no erosion marks between them. Another way we know is we find polystrata fossils. Poly means many, P-O-L-Y. Strata, S-T-R-A-T-A. Polystrata fossils are fossils that run through many different layers, and I'll show you pictures of those in just a minute. See, the layers were really formed during the flood. If you take a jar of dirt and shake it up, put some water in it, shake it up and set it down, it'll settle out just like this. You get gravel goes to the bottom, and then sand, and then silt, and then clay. And then very slowly the fine particles end up on top because they're going to float around in the water for hours till they finally land. During the flood of Noah, you get the very same sorting process. We get into lots more on that on video number 6. I was preaching in Union Center, South Dakota years ago. Marlissa, you would have been about 10, 12 years, that's right, 12 years old. Union Center is right there. You can't even find it on the map. 40 people in the whole town. 38 of them came to church. We had a revival, man, turned up the whole town. I don't know where the other two were. Out pulling a calf, I bet. But the preacher said, hey, Brother Hovind, let's go down to Rapid City, South Dakota. They've got a museum there with a bunch of dinosaur bones in it. I said, all right, man, I like dinosaurs, so let's go. So we all piled in the cars and vans, and we drove down to Rapid City, South Dakota. We got down to this museum. It's called the School of Mines Museum in Rapid City, South Dakota. We walk in the door, and this older fellow met us, and he says, folks, would you like me to give you a tour? I'm a guide here. We said, sure, that'd be great. The first place we stopped on the tour was the geologic time scale. They've got this chart all lit up behind glass. We stopped and we stood by that chart for a while. He said, now folks, this layer of rock right here is about 70 million years old. My daughter, Marlissa, said, sir, how do you know that layer is 70 million years old? He said, well, that's a good question, honey. We determine the age of the layers by the types of fossils they contain. They're called index fossils, and this layer had dinosaur bones in it, so it must be 70 million years old. She said, okay, thank you, sir. We walked around the other side. We're standing over here, and the guide said, now, folks, these bones right here are about 100 million years old. My daughter raised her hand again. She said, sir, how do you know how old those bones are? He said, that's a good question, honey. We determine the age of the bones by which layer they come from. She said, excuse me, sir. When we were standing on the other side, you told me you knew the age of the layers by the bones, and now you're telling me you know the age of the bones by the layers. She said, isn't that circular reasoning? I thought, wow, a chip off the old block. That guy had the strangest look on his face. It was almost as if he were thinking. He looked at me. I wasn't about to help him. He looked at my daughter. He said, you know, you're right. That is circular reasoning. He said, I never thought of that before. That poor fellow drove 50 miles one way that night to hear me preach in Union Center, South Dakota. The crowd swelled to 39. We set up a chair in the aisle. Afterwards, we talked for almost an hour. He said, Dr. Hovind, do you mean all this stuff about geology I'm teaching is wrong? He said, I teach this stuff at the college. I said, oh, no, sir, I like geology. You've learned the names of all the minerals. Man, just that's a good trick, folks. There's 1,200 different minerals. Some have names about that long. You've learned the hardness test, the Rockwell test, the scratch test. I said, no, sir, that's all good. And by the way, if you're going to speak or do something on creation science, you need to learn some basic geology. For instance, different minerals have different hardnesses. Talc is the softest. It's the softest mineral there is. As a matter of fact, it's so soft you can grind it up and make powder out of it. Anybody know what they call it when you do that? Talcum powder, right. The hardest one is which one? Hardest mineral? Diamond. I don't have a diamond, or I'd show you, but diamond is hardness of 10. Talc is hardness of 1. Everything in between has a number between 1 and 10, obviously. For instance, your fingernail is about a 3. So with your fingernail, you could scratch talc. You couldn't scratch a diamond. A diamond would scratch your fingernail because it's harder. Whichever one scratches the other one, that's the hardest one. So, for instance, a pocket knife is a hardness, can you read that, about a 5.5? So a pocket knife, its hardness of 5.5 will scratch a penny, which is a hardness of 3. Copper is, that's how hard it is. They rate it 1 to 10. Whereas a diamond would scratch a pocket knife because the diamond is harder. And that's the hardness scale, it's called. This is one of the tests they use to determine if you find a mineral, you say, what is it? Well, one thing is to find out the hardness. Another is find out the density, you know, how compact it is and stuff like that. Doesn't matter. Anyway, there's a lot of different minerals. So this professor, I said, no, sir, you've learned a lot of good things about geology. You learned the names of all the minerals, the hardness test, all this. I said, yes, sir, that's all good. No problem there. But as far as the layers being different ages, I said, yes, sir, it's all baloney. Those layers are not different ages. It's all based on what we call circular reasoning. Let me cover this real quick and we'll take a break. Circular reasoning. This fellow said in about 1830, Charles Lyell, some other guys, independently developed a biostratigraphic technique. That's a fancy word for a geologic column. For dating Cenozoic deposits based on, watch this, they dated the deposits based on the proportions of living and extinct species of mollusk shells. So if you find some clam shells in a layer of rock, you would say, oh, you know, to change from this kind of clam to this kind of clam would take millions of years, so this must be millions of years older than this one. They start off with the assumption that evolution happened and that the clams slowly changed from one kind to another, and then they dated the layers based upon the clam shells found in those layers. The article continues, strangely, little has been made to test this assumption. This failure leaves the method vulnerable to circularity. In other words, circular reasoning. Use one to prove the other, back and forth. Here's a textbook, page 306, they say, you should date the rocks by the fossils. Look what it says in yellow. The layers of rock can be dated by the types of fossils they contain. Now what does that say? You date the rocks by the fossils. On the next page it said, scientists have determined the relative times of appearance and disappearance of many kinds of organisms from the locations of their fossils in sedimentary rock layers. Ooh, now they're telling us that you date the fossils by the rocks. On the last page they told us to date the rocks by the fossils, and now you date the fossils by the rocks. It is circular reasoning. The intelligent layman has long suspected circular reasoning in the use of rocks to date fossils and fossils to date rocks. The geologist has never bothered to think of a good reply, feeling the explanations are not worth the trouble as long as the work brings results. This guy said, it cannot be denied from a strictly philosophical standpoint that geologists are here arguing in a circle. The succession of organisms has been determined by a study of their remains embedded in the rocks, and the relative ages of the rocks are determined by the remains of the organisms that they contain. Even Encyclopedia Britannica can figure it out. It's circular argument. Use one to prove the other. Ever since William Smith at the beginning of the 19th century, fossils have been and still are the best and most accurate method of correlating and dating the rocks in which they occur. Apart from very modern examples, which really are archaeology, by the way, it's a good time to point out, archaeology is dealing with the past few thousand years. If you're going to dig up an Indian civilization, you're an archaeologist. Whereas if you want to get into anthropology, the study of ancient things, then that would be an anthropologist, which is mostly an art form, not a science. That's study of things that are supposed to be millions of years old. Okay, this guy said, I can think of no cases of radioactive decay being used to date fossils. That's an interesting quote here. In other words, they don't date fossils by their carbon dating or potassium argon dating. They date them by the geologic position. Which layer did you find it in? Oh, well then it's so many million years old. We'll get into a few more quotes on circular reasoning right after the break, and then show you some of the polystrata fossils that have been found right after our break. All right, let's talk some more about circular reasoning and how the geologic column is tied in. This author said, radiometric dating would not have been feasible if the geologic column had not been erected first. What he means by this is, you can't tell the age of a fossil with radioactive dating, like carbon dating. You must first know the approximate age from the geologic column, which is why they generally will not date, unless you trick them into doing it, they won't date dinosaur bones with carbon dating because they assume dinosaurs lived 70 million years ago and carbon dating only goes back 30 or 40,000 years, and so they won't even do it. But when they do date dinosaur bones with carbon dating, it comes back 20, 25,000 years old. Not millions of years old. Okay. This Niles Eldridge is director of the American Museum of Natural History in New York, a strong believer in evolution. He spoke at University of West Florida. I went and heard him speak. He said, paleontologists cannot operate this way. There is no way simply to look at a fossil and say how old it is unless you know the age of the rocks it comes from. What's he saying there? You find a fossil, you have to know how old the layer of rock is. He said, and this poses something of a problem. If we date the rocks by their fossils, which is how it's done, how can we then turn around and talk about patterns of evolutionary change through time in the fossil record? Again, he's admitting circular reasoning. I like this one. The rocks do date the fossils, but the fossils date the rocks more accurately. I don't see how they can't see this. Stratigraphy cannot avoid this kind of reasoning if it insists on using only temporal concepts because circularity is inherent in the derivation of time scales. This guy said the charge of circular reasoning can be handled several ways. It can be ignored as not the proper concern of the public. In other words, you can say, well, it's none of your business how we date the rocks. We know what we're doing. We're the professionals. It can be denied by calling down the law of evolution. It can be admitted as a common practice, or it can be avoided by pragmatic reasoning. But I'm telling you, it is based on circular reasoning. This Larry Azar said, are the authorities maintaining on the one hand that evolution is documented by geology, and on the other that geology is documented by evolution? Isn't this a circular argument? I like the name of the article. Biologists, help. You need some help, all right. I like to ask evolutionists the question. I say, now fellas, your geologic column contains limestone, sandstone, shale, sandstone, limestone. You know, limestone is scattered throughout there several times. Limestone is used as a building block. You can see me by a big brick building up in Indiana made out of limestone. It's a pretty hard rock, not quite as hard as, concrete, but just about as close. Limestone is obviously made from what's called a sedimentary rock. That means it was deposited out of water. It's made from sediment. Like if the bottom of a mud puddle hardened into a rock, that would be sedimentary rock, made from sediments. Limestone is obviously, as a matter of fact, the whole geologic column is made of sedimentary rock. I like to ask him the question, how do you tell the difference between 100 million year old limestone and 600 million year old limestone? If I handed you a piece of limestone and said, how old is it, how would you know? They're both limestone, same kind of rock. Well, there's only one way they can tell the difference, that is by the index fossils. If your limestone contains a dinosaur bone, well then it's 70 million year old Jurassic limestone. However, if it contains a trilobite, it's going to be 600 million year old Cambrian limestone. They date the rocks based on the fossils they find in it. Here's a trilobite. I've got a bunch of them in my office there. This textbook says, matter of fact, my textbook might be right here. If not, it's in my office there. Okay. He says, trilobite fossils make good index fossils. If a trilobite, such as this one, is found in a rock layer, the rock layer was probably formed 500 to 600 million years ago. Okay, now why do they think trilobites indicate the rock is 500 million years old? Well, because they started with the assumption that trilobites evolved first. See, the oldest life form, according to their thinking, is supposed to be 600 million years old. Well, if trilobites came first, we have a real problem. Here's a human shoe print where a guy has stepped on a trilobite. Now, according to their thinking, Humans didn't get here till 3 million years ago. They didn't start wearing shoes till about 10,000 years ago. So how can you have a human shoe print on top of a trilobite? Now some have tried to argue that this is not a shoe print, it's a natural break in the shale. This kind of rock, called shale, splits very easily. And they say this is just a natural break, that's not really a shoe print. Well, Mr. Meister from Carnes, Utah, who found it, took it to quite a few geologists. Dr. H.H. Doling of Utah's Geological Survey certified it is not a fake. Reader's Digest, Mystery of the Unexplained talks about this. A human shoe print smashed on top of a trilobite, on top of a smashed trilobite, would indicate trilobites and humans lived at the same time. Which I could have told them. The Bible says God made everything in 6 days. Some people say maybe aliens visited the planet. That's what happened. You know, 600 million years ago, aliens came down here. One guy said maybe a large trilobite shaped like a shoe fell on a small one. Well, there are some big trilobites, I'll admit, but they're not shaped like a shoe. 2 Peter's got the best explanation. The scoffers in the last days are willingly ignorant of the flood. Probably trilobites dwell at the bottom of the ocean, go through the mud down there or something, and they do have gills for living in water. And probably during the time of the flood, the crust of the earth is flexing back and forth, and what used to be the bottom of the ocean is now above sea level. And people are running across this area trying to find a mountain to keep out of the water. And somebody stepped on a trilobite, which before had been at the bottom of the ocean. Trilobite eyes are incredibly complicated. This Science News back in 1974 said that trilobite eyes have the most sophisticated eye lenses ever produced by nature. Well, I disagree. They said they were produced by God. But the trilobite eye sometimes will have 1,500 lenses, which means he could actually see all directions at the same time. He can see behind him and see above him and see around him, all at the same time. Even Stephen Gould says the eyes of the early trilobites have never been exceeded for complexity or acuity. Well, now, if they're the first animal to evolve, or one of the first, don't you find it kind of interesting they've got the most complicated eye in the world? There might be some animals like trilobites still alive. I talked to Joe Taylor today at Mount Blanco Museum in Texas. They've got a great display of fossil trilobites, including many that are found in the folded position. What happens when a trilobite dies, it folds up or rolls up. How many have seen the little bugs we have here in Florida? They roll up, like call them a roly-poly. You know, a little round pill bug they're called. As soon as you touch them, they roll up, looks like a little BB. You know what I'm talking about, the little gray things? Yeah, called a pill bug. Trilobites do that also. When they get scared, they roll up, so their shell protects them on all sides. Many trilobites are found fossilized flattened out. Some are found fossilized rolled up. Many, millions, are found fossilized halfway. They started to roll up and died. Now think about it. Mount Blanco Museum has a display of trilobites where there's 2 of them that are laid out flat like they're walking. The one in front of them is halfway rolled up. Something caught them in a catastrophe happened. Probably an incredible water temperature change during the time of the flood. You'd have the fountains of the Great Deep breaking open, hot waters rushing into certain areas, killing these animals before they can even think of what's going on. They don't even have time to curl up. They just die in the flattened out position. This rock is called it contains a fossil called a graptolite. Now the graptolite is the New York state fossil. Every one of the 50 states has a state bird, a state flower, and a state fossil. Graptolite is from New York, just north of Pennsylvania, Becky. I don't know what Pennsylvania's fossil is. Would you know that? You lived there. You don't know? Okay. This rock is supposed to be 410 million years old. Now this means if you find a rock and it contains a graptolite, the professor will date it at being 410 million years old. Not because he knows how old the rock is, but because he knows it contains a graptolite and they're supposed to have lived 410 million years ago. Index fossils determine the age of the rocks. Well, this was all working fine until 1993, when they found graptolites are still alive in the South Pacific. Well, now hold it. If they're still alive, maybe that means they could live in any rock layer. That means they were probably alive 1,000 years ago, doesn't it? And 5,000 and 10,000 and 50,000. So maybe all the dating we've done of rock layers based on index fossils is baloney. And it is. Didn't happen. The textbook says, a fish with lobe-finned. Now, you'll need to know this one, a lobe-finned fish. What that means is it's got a little short arm and then a fin. So what is a lobe-finned fish? Should be a quiz question. That's a fish that has a short arm before the fin attaches to the body. The textbook says lobe-finned fish are index fossils for 325 to 410 million year old rock. Well, now just hold on a minute. Lobe-finned fish are still alive. Look at the fins on this fish. This is called a coelacanth. The coelacanth was discovered in 1938. A guy accidentally discovered one at a fish market in Madagascar, I believe. Realized, wow, this is a coelacanth. A fish that has a little short arm and then the fin grows out. And so they've since found quite a few coelacanths. Several aquariums have them. They apparently live very deep in the ocean, in the Indian Ocean. They've been discovered in Indonesia and in India, and off the coast of India and off the coast of Madagascar, Africa. Mostly the Indian Ocean. I'm not aware of them being anyplace else. But the coelacanth, when they found it, and here the textbooks had been telling the kids this is 70 million years old. Well, they found the coelacanth still alive, and the guy said, wow, look at this, one survived for 70 million years. It doesn't even enter their mind that, wait a minute, maybe your geologic column is baloney. See, they have to defend that geologic column. You don't dare question that because you lose your job. So instead they'll say, wow, some survived for 70 million years. They do the same thing when they find a living dinosaur. Wow, some of them survived for 70 million years. They just don't get it. Textbook says dinosaurs lived 70 million years ago. Now wait a minute. Dinosaur blood was found inside the bone. Cut open a dinosaur bone and they could still see the blood cells in there. Don't you think the blood cells would rot in less than a few million years? Video number 2, we have some more on dinosaurs and humans still living together, of course, what we just covered in the last part. This is a biology book. Let's see, I don't think I brought that one, did I? Nope. Campbell? No. He says 18 million year old magnolia leaves from Idaho shale were still green when the rock was first cracked open. Now what's the problem with his statement? He assumes they're 18 million years old. Truth of the matter is, probably that Idaho shale buried all sorts of things at the time of the flood. In the Reader's Digest, Mysteries of the Unexplained, there's a whole section about living toads that when you break open a lump of coal, a toad jumps out. Many stories have been told like that. In France, they were blasting a tunnel through a mountain to put in a railroad line, and they broke open this huge boulder of limestone, and with a piece of dynamite, they stuck some dynamite in, blasted this big rock to get it out of the way, and a pterodactyl stepped out, stretched its wings, 10-foot 9-inch wingspan, leathery skin, it squawked and died. Now how? Here they are in the middle of a mountain, solid rock, they've been blasting in this to make this tunnel, and a pterodactyl steps out. When they looked at the boulder that they just broken in half, there was a perfect impression of the pterodactyl on both sides. How would you explain that? Becky?
Well, the rock cells evolved into an...
Oh, rock cells evolved pterodactyls in the middle of them. Yeah, that could be. Well, I have a theory about that. During the flood, all sorts of things were buried. Many were buried alive. Now, frogs or toads, during the winter, they dig down into the mud, cover themselves up with a coating of mud, and go to sleep. How long can they last? Can they hibernate 5 years? 10 years? 4,400 years? I don't know. But I know there are lots of stories where live toads or live lizards have come out of rock. And I'll show you the stories in Reader's Digest, Strange Stories and Amazing Facts, or Mysteries of the Unexplained. These stories are told in many of these books, and it gives the documentation of who it happened to. Sometimes the toads are kept alive for weeks afterwards. I think the flood's the only explanation for that. get these live animals trapped in these rocks. They're going to say each of the layers is a different age. Well now, hold on just a minute. All over the world we find petrified trees standing up. Darwin didn't like to round off the numbers, so he said the Wealden deposits in England were 306,662,400 years old. Oh, that's real good, Charlie. How do you know this now? Explain this to me. Here's a petrified tree standing straight up. This one's in Germany, but they're found all over the world. Petrified trees standing up. Notice it's running through many different layers of rock. This is another one of the proofs that the layers of rock are not different ages. Here's a petrified tree with me standing next to it. This one's from Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming. In Yellowstone, there's this place called Specimen Ridge. I was there a couple years ago when Eric graduated from the college out there. And we went to Specimen Ridge. There are petrified trees standing up. None of the trees are more than 500 years old. They have less than 500 rings. Many of them run through 4 or 5 layers above the one that they're in. Nearly all of them have roots that go out a short distance and stop. If a hurricane came through town here and knocked trees down, it would knock the tree over and pull up a root ball. Does it get all the roots out of the ground? No, it breaks them off, doesn't it? It'll break them off, you know, depending on how strong the root is, it'll break it off somewhere. And you end up with a root ball. Now during the flood of Noah, I bet there were zillions of trees that were ripped out by the roots, floated around and redeposited. They float along and the water slows down, so they stop and settle to the bottom. And then a new layer of mud comes over the top, and then another layer of mud, and then pretty soon some more logs float by and they end up getting deposited. You ended up with 27 consecutive layers of logs, of tree stumps at Specimen Ridge, Wyoming, in Yellowstone. Now the evolutionist will say, see, this proves the earth is millions of years old because what happened, the forest grew at least 500 years, then it was buried, then new trees started to grow, and they lived at least 500 years, and then they were buried, and then new trees started to grow. So you got to take 500 times 27 minimum, which is what, 14,000 or 13,500 years. They'll say this is minimum of 13 or 14,000 years old. No, no, no. These stumps go, if one tree stump goes up through into another layer, it didn't sit there for millions of years waiting for the next layer to come. It would have rotted and fallen over by then. When a tree dies, it rots in a few years and falls over. Petrified trees that are standing up are found all over the world. There's a guy by one in Joggins, Nova Scotia. Quite a few have been found there. I got some other more modern pictures. Here's one from Alabama. This guy's a friend of mine up in at Troy State. No, Don Patton, I don't know Don McDonald, but I know one of the other guys there. He said, we find petrified trees in coal all the time. He's a miner. They dig up coal seams, and you find this tree, and it extends up right out of the coal into the next layer of rock. Sometimes the top part of the tree is petrified, and the bottom part of the tree is coalified. I got a rock in the right above your desk there, Becky. The outside is petrified, the inside is coalified, turned to coal. Same rock. Interesting. Here's some from Joggins, Nova Scotia. This family took these pictures for me. From the little kid sitting there putting her hand on a petrified tree standing up. Can you see that one? It obviously went way down. Most of the pieces have now fallen out of the cliff. But there are petrified trees standing up, running through multiple rock layers. In Germany they're found, in France, in many parts of the United States these petrified trees are found. In California they find lots of petrified trees standing up, running through multiple rock layers. Sometimes the trees are upside down. The big end is on top. Now how could this happen slowly over millions of years? I've thought about it for a long time, and I think the evolutionists really have only 2 ways to solve this. Number one, they can say the trees stood there for millions of years while the dirt slowly formed around them. What would be the problem with that theory? The tree would rot. The tree's going to fall over. It's not going to stand there for millions of years. Or number two, the trees grew through hundreds of feet of solid rock looking for sunlight. Well, then you got the problem, who planted the seed? And how did it know there was sunlight hundreds of feet above it? The simpler solution is the trees were buried in a big flood. See, how fast was that calf going? Keep that thought in mind, right? The flood formed nearly all the layers of rock that we see in the world, and we have polystrata fossils to prove it. We'll get into more of that later. This geologic column does not exist anywhere in the world except in the textbooks. But you need to understand the history of the times. In 1830, when that book came out, things were becoming pretty prosperous in the world. It was the age of industrial revolution, lots of new machines. In the old days, if you wanted to make a shirt, you had to go get the cotton, spin it into thread, weave the fabric, sew the shirt. It might take you 3 weeks to make a shirt. Now they got machines that can make a shirt in 3 hours. Wow. Now instead of spinning the thread by hand, with their, pedaling their spinning wheels, you got a big machine to make it in a hurry. And the more machines that came on the line in the early 1800s, called the Industrial Revolution, the more prosperous things became. I mean, all of a sudden, you didn't have to work, 8 hours a day just to prepare food. You could do it in 2 hours a day. You didn't have to spend 3 weeks harvesting your corn. You now have a machine that'll harvest the corn in 3 hours. So once things, it starts to allow you to get more done in a day, to make more money in your lifetime, and everything's becoming very prosperous. And so some people thought, we got everything we need. We don't need God anymore. And often when times are good, people turn away from God. When times are bad, they turn to God. Some people say, boy, if God had given me $1 million, I'd tithe. No, probably if God gave you $1 million, it would ruin you. You'd end up getting away from God altogether. That's probably, and God knows that's what would happen. It does to most folks. Doesn't have to, but it just seems to work that way. So in the early 1830s, people were believing the Bible was true. The flood formed all those layers. Lyell comes along and says, no, these layers formed slowly. And they started believing it, and it turned them away from the biblical worldview. And all of this had a very profound influence on a young fella named Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin went on a boat ride in 1831. The boat was called the HMS Beagle. And that boat ride, while he's sailing around, he had just graduated from Bible college. And he brought some books with him to read. One of the books he brought was Principles of Geology, written in 1830. Here it is the next year, 1831, and Darwin brings this book. That book, as he read it on that voyage, changed his life forever. And we'll talk next class about what happened to Charles Darwin in the early 1830s. Coming up next week. Thank you for joining us. This will be class number 8 of our Creation Science Evangelism course number 102. And we are picking up with Darwin when he set sail on board the Beagle in 1831. Lyell's book came out in what year? Who remembers what year from last week? 1830. And Darwin just graduated from Bible college the next year to be a preacher. Darwin has a fascinating history. His great-grandfather was Erasmus Darwin. He was so fat. He was a doctor, medical doctor, but he was so fat they cut the table out for him to be able to sit and eat because he couldn't reach the food otherwise. They had a special table with it cut out for him. His dad was also a doctor, Charles Darwin's dad was, and they had sent Charlie to school to be a doctor, but he just didn't have the stomach for it, the blood and the cutting people open. He just couldn't do it. Charlie Darwin was basically a dud at everything he did. He was a loser. He didn't know how to work. He didn't know how to do much of anything, except he loved to hunt and shoot birds. He just loved to shoot birds. But he also raised pigeons. Kind of a strange fella. He really enjoyed worms. He loved worms, and that's one of the reasons he hated birds, because birds ate worms, and he thought that was kind of cruel and hard on the worms, so he shot all the birds he could find. The more you read about the guy, the more you wonder how on earth he ever became so famous, because he really was a loser. He was a lousy student. He wasn't good at much of anything. Never showed an interest in hardly anything except sports, playing around. He just didn't do much. But when he dropped out of medical school, they sent him to college to be a preacher. Because in England, if you got to be a pastor of a church, I mean the Church of England was, and still is, I believe, supported by the government, tax supported. So you don't have to work, you don't have to do nothing, you get your paycheck every week whether you do anything or not. The idea was, I'm just going to be a country parson, you know, and just do nothing the rest of my life. He did like to study, he read a lot, and so when he couldn't find a job after getting out of Bible college, his dad, medical doctor, a very important man in the area, pulled a few strings and got him on board the HMS Beagle. Now the Beagle was going to sail around for 5 years and collect information about various continents, you know, animals and plants on different continents, South America particularly, but they were going to go completely around the world. Darwin got a job sailing around on the Beagle, and of course it's a 5-year voyage. Now the deal was, you don't get paid anything. Well, we're going to work for 5 years, you get paid nothing, but we will feed you. His dad said, son, that's the best offer you got, you better take it. So he set sail for 5 years just so they'd feed him. It was a good chance to grow up, you know, and like guys go off to the military for 4 years and they come back, they grow up fast in the military. Well, as Darwin sailed around, he brought some books to read, of course. He brought his Bible. He just got out of Bible college. And he brought a book by Charles Lyell, The Principles of Geology. Now, you need to understand a little what was going on here. In the 1830s, an awful lot of Christians were teaching a doctrine, and this would be a quiz question. The doctrine was called the fixity of the species. Fixity, F-I-X-I, you spell it, I don't know how to, fixity of the species. What that means is, they said if there are 20 different kinds of dogs, well then God made 20 kinds of dogs, because nothing changes. And if there are animals that are adapted to cold weather, well God made cold weather animals and God made warm weather animals and nothing ever changes, okay? And if there's a particular kind of bird on a certain kind of island, well God made it for that island. They didn't believe, now some, of course they weren't all like this, but probably the majority opinion in Darwin's day was this doctrine called the fixity of the species. Darwin, as he sailed around, it became pretty obvious to him this is simply not true. And he was right. Oftentimes the Christians teach things that it's not what's in the Bible, and then people rebel against their teaching and think somehow all of Christianity is bad because this false doctrine is bad. Like the Pharisees. You know, they added to the Word of God so much. And people they just rebelled against the Pharisees' rules, but it caused them to rebel against God's Word, and that was the mistake. One of for instance, the Sabbath commandment was, do no servile work on the Sabbath. You know, you work like a servant. Don't do that on the Sabbath. God said, I want you to rest. Well, so the Pharisees came along and said, well, let's see, walking more than 1/8 of a mile, that's work. If you walk less than 1/8 of a mile from your home, that's fine. So they would take a piece from their house, a brick or something. They would walk 1/8 of a mile, break off a piece, drop it on the ground, and say, oh, this is now my house. Walk another 1/8 of a mile, break off a piece, drop it on the ground. Look for a loophole to the stupid rule which they made up to begin with. This type of thing is what the Pharisees did, and Jesus really gave the Pharisees a hard time, and he should have. But we got a bunch of Pharisees today doing the very same thing. The Bible says, 1 Corinthians, it's a shame for man to have long hair. That's all it says. And from that, some people say, well, here's how long is long, and they make all these extra rules. Now, just a minute. This is a matter of Christian interpretation. You decide what you think God is happy with. The Bible says women should dress modestly. After that, it's up to you. You know, I think it's your decision as a Christian to decide, you know, what do you think pleases God? And if you go beyond that, you quickly become a legalist or a Pharisee. I don't want to offend anybody. I keep a nice short haircut because I don't want to offend anybody. I want to, nobody would slam the door at me because of my hair if I was out knocking on doors soul winning. Now they might not like something else I have or do or say, but you know, at least the hair won't be an offense to them. So I just think that's not worth the issue. You know, it's not worth fighting about. And many issues are that way. So Darwin, here he was, about to set sail on the Beagle. One of his jobs was to collect bugs and birds for the people back in England who were paying for this trip, because they wanted to get a collection of stuffed birds and stuffed bugs, or formaldehyde preserved bugs for their big museum they're building. So some guy paid for this boat to go out for 5 years. As Darwin is sailing around, he said this book changed his life forever. Charles Lyell's book did. Because in this book, remember, Charles Lyell said the earth is, you know, millions of years old. And each of the layers that you see is a different age. Well, Darwin read that book on the voyage and believed it. Later on, he wrote a letter to one of his friends, Russell Wallace, and he said, "Disbelief crept over me on a very slow rate. I felt no distress." In other words, it didn't bother him that he lost his faith in the Bible. But on that trip, Captain Fitzroy, that'd be another question you need to have on a quiz, Captain Fitzroy, F-I-T-Z-R-O-Y, he was one of those, he was a Christian, but he was one of those Pharisee types who was extremely hard to get along with. And Darwin really defended Christianity against the sailors for most of the voyage. He defended the Bible for the first part of the voyage, and gradually as he read Lyell's book, it appears that that was the thing that really convinced him against the Bible being literally true. And plus Fitzroy and Darwin talked many hours on this 5-year voyage, and Fitzroy was just absolutely inflexible, unreasonable. You couldn't talk to the guy. It's my way or hit the road, you know. And there's, of course, people like that today, plenty of them. And so that kind of drove Darwin away at least from the rigid fundamentalism. And there's no telling how many people have been, and I'm a fundamentalist, okay, but there's no telling how many people have been driven away from Christianity by the fundamentalists who got their dumb rules that they did not get from the Bible. Anyway, during this voyage, as they sailed around, they would stop in at all sorts of different ports. On the right side of South America, you can see on the map there, Darwin, as he's coming into this port, he saw this river and this giant valley. And here he is, he's been reading Lyell's book about how, you know, things take millions of years to happen. And he said, you know, I bet that river slowly moved grain after grain of sand and made that massive canyon. I mean, I forget which one it was, but it's one of the rivers in South America that really impressed him, like, this would have taken millions of years. Well, yeah, or it would take one big flood. But he assumed the present is the key to the past. And there's the problem. He's looking at this river moving down this little channel, bringing a few grains of sand at a time, and he's thinking, wow, to make this giant valley would take millions of years. Well, you're right, Charlie. If that river did that, it would take millions of years. But that river didn't do that. And that's exactly where they go wrong. The flood is what they forget. They don't like to talk about that flood. But Darwin came to these islands right here, the Galapagos Islands, and that'll be a quiz question. Galapagos, G-A-L-A-P-O-G-O-S, I believe. On the Galapagos Islands, they found giant tortoises. You ever gone to the zoo or the carnival or something? You see those huge tortoises. A turtle lives in the water. A tortoise lives on land. That's the difference. Okay, you caught a tortoise the other day, right? They're out here. A box. Yeah. Okay. If it's on the tortoise, a tortoise lives on land. A turtle lives in the water. Otherwise, they look very similar. The giant Galapagos tortoises. Nobody knows for sure how long they live, but as far as I know, all of them come originally from Galapagos. They are supposed to be excellent food. The sailors would just pick these things up and take them on board the ship and let them wander around because, you know, what do they move? 5 feet an hour, you know. You set them down, you go back to get him 3 days later, he's only 50 yards away. And they would eat them. They would just let them live on the ship until they're ready to eat them. Right. Yeah. So they just about wiped them out. Because it was such I mean, how hard is it to catch one? It's real simple. But picking them up gets to be a problem because they're huge. They know that they live 250 years, and some people suspect they live 400 years, those tortoises. No, they don't get excited about much, you know, just kind of stay calm. Life's nerves don't get rattled very easily. Anyway, that's where these tortoises come from, Galapagos Islands. There are many islands to this Galapagos area. I don't know exactly how many, but there are some of the major ones right there. And one of them is named Darwin, one is named Wolf, Pinta, and all these different names for these islands. On these islands, Darwin noticed each of them had a slightly different type of finch. Now, finch is a real tiny little bird. And since Darwin hated birds, he shot all the birds he could find and collected them and stuffed them and mounted them, you know, for the museum. And he noticed that they were all finches, but their beak shapes were different. On some islands, the finches had to live on the ground because there weren't any trees. So if it's a ground-dwelling finch, he noticed it had slightly different feet and slightly different beak for cracking, you know, nuts or something. If it lived in the trees, so he divided them up into sections. Those that eat berries, buds, and flowers on the bottom left, that's got a B by it, comes from one of the islands over there. Some that eat insects and flowers, and some that eat fruit and nectar on the Cocos Island. So he divided these birds up, studied them an awful lot. He spent a lot of time classifying these birds based upon what they eat, where they live, you know, the available food, the shape of their beak. Now, a finch is only this big to begin with, okay, so we're talking not very much. But after studying all these 14, he finally ended up with 14 varieties of finches. And what happened was, the birds would apparently got blown off of South America in a storm, because it's quite a ways out to Galapagos. I think 200 miles maybe, I don't know, but it's quite a ways. Apparently this storm blew them out, and he ended up, a little tiny bird, ends up on the island. Can't get back. So he stays there. And they raise their families, and eventually, those that, if there's only seeds to eat, and it takes a pretty heavy beak to be able to crack the seed, the babies that are born that don't have a heavy beak can't crack the seed. So they die. Suppose we said, we're going to go through Pensacola and kill everybody who is under 6 feet tall. Full grown, but under 6 feet tall. We kill them all. Then we wait about 20 years and do it again. Wait about 20 years and do it again. Eventually, you've got an entire population of people that are over 6 feet tall, because the genes for less than 6 feet are gone. You weeded them out of the population. That's called selective survival. They do that. Dog breeders do this all the time. It's called selective breeding. If you want a dog with a long curly hair, well, then you pick out the puppies that have the longest, curliest hair, and you only let them crossbreed to the next one that has the long curly hair, and eventually you've got a whole breed of long curly-haired dogs. Probably nearly all the varieties of dogs we have today came from this process. It's called selective or artificial selection. Now, natural selection is where nature decides which one survives. In the case of the Galapagos Islands, if there are no trees to live on, then birds that require trees for safety aren't going to survive. Those that can live on the ground and survive against whatever predators are available, they can survive. So I want you to be able to explain for the quiz the difference between natural selection and artificial selection. Basically, natural selection, nature, through either cold weather or warm weather or some natural factor, would influence who survives. And artificial selection is where somebody on the outside, like a human being normally, decides, I'm going to let these survive and breed and these will not survive. Cattle farmers do that all the time. You get a bull or a cow that's a little sickly, well, you don't want that breeding back into the herd and spreading the defect around. So artificial selection is extremely rapid, what you can do. Darwin used artificial selection raising his pigeons, and he got some extremely wild-looking, fancy pigeons. They were still pigeons. But he noticed with artificial selection, you could get some incredible varieties in the pigeon family. There are probably hundreds of varieties of pigeons. And then Darwin said, well, if I can do this in just my lifetime and can raise all these hundreds of varieties of pigeons, what can nature do for millions of years? Well, nature could probably produce a variety of pigeons too, Charlie. But it's still a pigeon. It's still a bird. And somehow he got it into his head on this voyage that if we can see these little variations produced over a short lifespan, what would millions of years do? And that's where he went from science into fantasy, daydreaming, that maybe this proves the birds and the bananas have a common ancestor. He just went way off, way beyond reality, and assuming that this would somehow go farther. If we took all of the rabbits in the world, captured them all, turned them loose in Alaska, the vast majority would freeze the first year, but a few would survive. Those that have the thicker fur would survive, or those that have a bigger body. I was up in Saskatoon, Canada, Saskatchewan, Canada. I was on this plane going up there to preach up in Saskatoon, and the whole plane is full of hunters from Alabama and Texas and Georgia. I mean, I was about the only one that wasn't a hunter on the plane. A bunch of rednecks. I got talking to the guy next to me. I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm going up to go deer hunting in Saskatchewan. I said, where are you from? He said, Alabama. I said, you got all kinds of deer in Alabama. He said, oh, not as big as they got up here. Really? The deer up in Canada are much bigger than the deer down south here. So they shoot them. All they want's the head. It costs them $5,000 to go in there, shoot the deer. They leave the meat for the local Indians. All they get's the head, and then it costs them a couple $100 to get it shipped back to the United States and stuffed and mounted to hang on the wall. But they're huge deer. I don't know the numbers, but I would guess an average deer here in Florida might weigh 80, 100 pounds, 80 or 100 pounds. Average deer up there might weigh 200 pounds. Up in Illinois or Minnesota, the deer are bigger, but not as big as Canadian deer. Now, why would even the crows, if you compare a crow here to the crows you saw in Wyoming, the crows are much bigger. Why is that, you think?
Bigger body, less surface area for the heat.
Exactly right. Bigger body, they can survive the cold better. Smaller crows couldn't survive. Bigger crows can survive colder weather. Eskimos generally are shorter and stockier, whereas a long, lanky person has more surface area exposed that can't tolerate the cold as well. It's just that would be an example of natural selection. However, it's very limited. Natural selection has worked on the rabbit populations to the point where the Alaska rabbits, because they got a short summer and long winter, they have a certain breeding cycle where they have their babies at a certain time of the year, and if you have the babies too late, they die. Have them too early, they die. So down in Florida, they don't have that problem. Florida rabbits and Alaska rabbits cannot interbreed. They're considered a different subspecies. Now, Florida rabbits and Minnesota rabbits can breed just fine, and Minnesota rabbits and Alaska rabbits can breed just fine. They're halfway between. But you now have the two extremes which are no longer interfertile. And so people will say, see, that's an example of speciation. Okay, well, if you want to call that speciation, then I agree. But the Bible doesn't talk about species. The Bible talks about kinds. And if you would put the Alaska rabbit and the Florida rabbit and the Minnesota rabbit in a cage and bring up all the 7-year-olds in the world and say, what are these? Oh, those are rabbits. It's the same kind of animal. I mean, use your head.
So do they call that evolution?
They'll call that evolution.
Do they say that it's produced a different species?
And sometimes, because who decides what's a species?
Yeah.
And who's making this decision anyway? Some guy that's desperate for evidence to begin with for evolution, to make his theory look good.
Because you would think, hey, the one in Florida can breed with the one in Minnesota, so that has to be the same species. Minnesota can breed with the one in Alaska, that has to be the same species.
That's why they normally call that a subspecies.
Just trying to get around that.
Yeah, but then you look at a coyote and a wolf,
Yeah.
which are different species,
But they can
breed. There's a picture on the internet somebody sent me yesterday or a couple days ago about a whalpin. At a zoo, I think it's the San Diego Zoo where I just was, or maybe the Hawaiian one where we were a couple weeks ago. They crossed a killer whale and a dolphin.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, in Hawaii.
Killer whale and a dolphin. Now, normally, crosses like that end up being sterile. They cannot produce. But this one had a baby of its own. It was not sterile.
What did they breed it with?
I think with a dolphin.
Wow.
And what happened?
And they got babies that would be 1/4 killer whale and 3/4 dolphin. Gradually, it's going to breed back to one or the other. But even still, if you put a killer whale and a dolphin side by side and stand 50 feet away and look at them, they look awful similar. I would say it's a very similar kind of animal. And they might have even had a common ancestor. Somebody, Tino Gropey up in Wisconsin, a good friend of mine, he sent me a whole series of pictures of crosses. He sent me a liger.
A lion and a tiger?
Lion and a tiger. A lion and a tiger can crossbreed and make a liger or a tigon, depending which one is the father. It'll work either way.
With the dolphin and the killer whale, what did it look like? I mean, did it have the...
It looked halfway between the two, yeah.
Really?
Well, a horse and a jackass will produce a mule,
Right.
and the mules are almost always male and sterile. 1 out of 20,000 is a female and is not sterile. But then who do you cross it with? Cross it with your sterile male? What do you get? Nothing. So generally, I would say the Bible definition of kind, and I've been in several debates where they really press me, what is a kind? What is a kind? I've decided to go ahead and answer the question, knowing it'll set me up for, as a target. A kind is those that were originally, in the creation, originally able to reproduce. Now today we might have different species that are from the same kind. They were part of the original breeding stock.
I noticed in the last 2 debates you went ahead and said that
Yeah.
rather than...
That's what the Bible says.
Yeah.
The definition of kind has to do with bring forth, have children. They shall bring forth after their kind.
So then do you keep going after them about species and say, okay, well, give me... Because I remember one guy said, I those animals that are able to reproduce.
Sure, and I said, okay, dog and a wolf are different species,
Well, they can reproduce.
and they can reproduce.
Why
So,
are we calling them different species?
so where is your definition? You know, your definition breaks down.
Yeah.
But see, somehow they're all blinded. They think, you know, give me a definition of kind, or else you don't know what, or else I win the debate on evolution. I don't know exactly what the original kinds were. Probably nobody does.
What difference does it make?
Yeah, I think for the vast majority, it's obvious. Okay, let's put a dog and a banana. Now, those are different kinds. Okay, dog and a wolf, same kind. Dog and a hyena, I don't know, you know, dog and a fox.
There's going to be some that
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how many original kinds of dog-type animals there were. And today we have, you know, hundreds, but there may have been originally 5, just to pick a number. Or cat. Is a house cat and a tiger and a mountain lion and a, you know, are they from the original ancestors in the garden? I don't know. God might have made 3 kinds of cats, and now we have 800 species. Or he might have made 1 kind of cat. I don't know. But I know if you put all the animals back in the basic kinds, there's only about 8,000 kinds of animals that have been classified. Now there's who knows how many million species, because some guy gets the idea that he wants to call something a different species, but it's the same kind. All right. So Darwin noticed all these finches and said, I believe all these finches had a common ancestor. You're right, Charlie. It was a bird. But then he wrote in his book on page 170, Charlie said, it is a truly wonderful fact that all animals and all plants throughout all time and space should be related to each other. Now, would you say that is a logical conclusion to draw from seeing 14 varieties of birds? No. No, that is a stretch. Okay? If you flip a coin 3 times and get heads every time, and you conclude, wow, this is going to be heads from now on the rest of my life. Well, I don't think so. Okay? That's quite a stretch. Darwin really went overboard on this one. What he observed is called microevolution. Now, I don't like that word. I think the word should be stricken from the dictionary. It's a lousy phrase, okay? However, we're stuck with it because that's what they're going to use, okay? You need to understand it, and then I think you need to avoid it because it's not really a good term, because it implies evolution. We ought to just call it a variation, because that's what it is. Probably the 250 varieties of dogs had a common ancestor, a dog. And probably the roses. You know, the original rose only had 5 petals. The real, wild, original rose has only got 5 petals. Looks like a daisy.
How do you know that?
I guess I read a botany book where they were talking about the history of the rose, and some guy got a mutant rose, a mutation, where instead of the petals sticking out, they were curled up, and there was more of them. And he thought it looked neat. So he did whatever he did before and kept getting this mutant and finally crossbred them, and they happened to be fertile, and he ended up, now we have roses all over the world that are from this original mutation.
But normally, that mutation would have bred right back into the...
Unless somebody had been there working with it,
Right,
it wouldn't have survived.
right. So natural selection would not have produced further.
Probably not, no. Artificial selection did, and now, if you turn them all loose back into the woods, I suspect within 100 years they would go back. Unless the original genes are gone.
They got same data, but it's
Right,
taken away the-
rearranged data. For instance, if I gave you 500 Chihuahuas and says, here, I want you to go out on this deserted island, and I want you to crossbreed these dogs until you come back with a Great Dane. Well, you're probably not going to be able to do that, okay? You might end up with a bigger Chihuahua, still just as useless as the small one, but you're not going to get a Great Dane because the genes for that big a dog are just simply gone. It's not available, okay? If you got all the pygmies and said, okay, we're going to crossbreed these pygmies until we get, you know, somebody 7 feet tall, well, it's probably not going to happen. There probably isn't. Yeah, maybe you might get one 5 or 6 feet, but, you know, there's going to be, the limit is different from the gene pool, from the information that's available. Okay. Microevolution is certainly observable. You can make it happen. This is what farmers do for a living. Over all the years and years and years of breeding cows, they have learned certain cows have certain traits that are desirable for a certain product, okay? If you want a cow that gives the best milk in the world, my understanding of cows is that you get a Guernsey. The problem is Guernseys don't give very much milk. Now, other kinds of cows will give an awful lot. In Illinois, we saw the cow that at that time was the world record holder, giving 100 and some pounds of milk every day. 100 pounds of milk every day. Yeah, all they do is eat all day, and then they milk them twice a day, you know, and the rest of the day they're eating. But now the Angus is really good beef. That's supposed to be one of the best eating cows, apparently, or one of the top ones, the Angus. The Brahma is the one that got the big hump on his back. That one can stand the heat really well. The Brahma came from down Mexico's Central American countries, you know, and it was able to tolerate the heat, whereas the Angus was able to give the best beef. Brahma's not as good eating, but it stands the heat better. Angus is better beef, but it doesn't stand the heat very well. And so they cross them and get a Brangus, which is both, but only for that one generation. So the farmer will have a whole herd of Angus cows and one Brahma bull, and then he takes the generation they produce and sells them. If he tried to raise them to produce the next generation, he would lose it.
Why couldn't you breed a Brangus and a Brangus?
I guess it starts blending back to one trait or the other. You know, this is the type of stuff you study, and I didn't take classes on that. You know, on farming, okay, husbandry. It'll start to lose some of the traits, right? So when a Norwegian and a Russian marry, you got the two supreme races, you know, that they ought to produce really good kids if they ever would, right, son? Okay, tell him, brother. See, okay. So the microevolution is observable, it is scientific, it is scriptural. The Bible says they're going to bring forth after their kind. Probably Chihuahua and Great Dane came from a common ancestor, even though they look extremely different. And if all you found were the bones in the ground and you'd never seen a live animal, you probably would never put them as the same kind.
What do you mean? Never put the bones?
If nobody had ever seen a live dog, and you found bones of Chihuahuas and bones of Great Danes, you would not imagine that's the same kind of animal. If all you found was a fossil caterpillar and a fossil butterfly, you would never dream it's the same animal, right? But it is.
I wonder how many fossils we find like that today.
There are lots of fossils like that. They're like the dinosaurs. There's no telling how many are actually the same kind. There are many, for instance, there's what's called sexual dimorphism, where the male and the female are very different, even in their, you know, skeletal structure. For instance, if you look at sea lions, the male is huge and the female is always real tiny. So, and if you look at black widow spiders, the female's huge and the male's real tiny. You would never put those two together. If all you found, you know, were fossils of them, you probably would have them as a different species. So that's why today there are 700 or 800 different kinds or varieties of dinosaurs in the dinosaur books for kids, and they got all these big names to learn. There's probably only about 30 different kinds of dinosaurs. But there's all these variations. Who would ever put a, well, some animals, as they grow, they go through totally different stages. Caterpillar, butterfly. Others, like a baby grasshopper, looks like a big grasshopper, just smaller. Whereas a baby butterfly looks like a worm. Same thing with a fly. It's a maggot. Then it becomes a fly. Okay. Some go through several of these stages. Yeah, tadpole, then it's got 2 legs, then it's got 4 legs, and a tail, and then it's got 4 legs and no tail.
Do they ever try to use that as proof of evolution?
Some do.
I always wonder, you know, why don't they use caterpillar to butterfly?
Oh, I have almost all the time in debates, they'll say, caterpillar to a butterfly is evolution. I say, no, it's driven, this is directed by a very complex code. The caterpillar isn't doing this on his own. I mean, it spins a cocoon, turns to jelly inside, and reforms with wings that can fly away. Explain that to him. Yeah, how did that evolve? For millions of years, none of them survived. You know, they got to the cocoon stage and died. You know, turned to jelly and something ate them. You know, none of them survived.
Can't reproduce until they're butterflies, right?
Right, can't reproduce till they're butterflies.
Oh, wow.
I mean, when you study stuff like this, you say, God, you got to be so smart. And you put so many things down here just to make it look obvious that it couldn't evolve, and yet people still believe it anyway.
Is it true that caterpillars have to be alive 17 years before?
There's all sorts of varieties. Some are only in the caterpillar stage for a few months, turn to a butterfly or moth or whatever. Some are 17 years. That is an entire study in itself that you could spend a lifetime on, and it's very interesting stuff. Okay, Dog, wolf, and coyote probably had a common ancestor, but a 3-year-old can tell you it's the same kind of animal. When I do at churches now, I'll say, okay, I got some animals up here on the screen. How many kids are 5 and under? Raise your hand. By then the parents got to wake them up, you know, hey, wake up, kid, raise your hand. Okay. Okay, now boys and girls, now let's see who can be the first one to tell me the answer to this one. Here we have a dog, a wolf, a coyote, and a banana. Which one is not like the others? And I'll get some 5-year-old to raise their hand, and I'll make everybody clap. Yeah, hey, Johnny got it here, you know. It's obvious. And yet somehow they don't see it. If Charlie wants to believe a dog and a banana have a common ancestor, I don't care what Charlie believes. But that's not science. That's his religion. And I still am 0 for 50. In the 50 debates I've done, I have never gotten an evolutionist to admit that evolution is religion.
I've come close.
Have you?
But I mean, once they realize what they're about to say,
They stop.
they stop.
They can't say that, you know, right? But it is. See, because once they admit it's a religion, then they're going to say, well, then we shouldn't be teaching this in school, should we? It's precisely my point. Welcome to our side.
Whatever evolutionists say,
Okay, we're going to quit here and take a break in a second, but in Genesis chapter 1, the first chapter in the Bible, 10 times the phrase appears, after his kind. That'll be a quiz question. Genesis chapter 1, the phrase after its kind or after his kind or after their kind, that phrase appears 10 times in only 31 verses. I think God wanted us to get the message. After the kind. And many people get into debates with evolutionists and they get themselves in trouble because they start arguing about species. And they're doing exactly what Darwin's contemporaries were doing, and they don't even realize it. They're falling into the trap of saying species never change. Yes, species do change, but kinds don't. Same kind. For one thing, who decides what's a new species anyway? People say, all scientists believe in evolution. I say, oh, really? Who decides who's a scientist? Speaking of spiders, we got one there. Okay, let's take a little break. When we come back, we'll finish up part 4. Well, let's continue now with what the textbooks teach versus what the Bible teaches versus what Charles Darwin teaches about evolution. The Bible says several times, actually 10 times in the first chapter in the book of Genesis, that the animals and plants will bring forth after his kind. Notice the use of the word kind, after his kind. See, the problem is this word evolution has at least 6 different meanings, or 6 different levels, or phases, or steps, whatever you want to call it. The first one would be cosmic evolution. That's the Big Bang. We talked about that in an earlier session. And then there's chemical evolution, and then stellar evolution, and then organic evolution. That's the origin of matter. And then macroevolution. Now, the last one is called microevolution. I object to the term. Okay, I don't think microevolution is a good term, but we're stuck with it. Okay, everybody uses the term microevolution, so let's just define this now and show you that microevolution happens, but it should just be called a variation within the kind, exactly like the Bible says. Macroevolution is what does not happen. And some professors are always trying to give me a hard time saying, well, just exactly where is the line between micro and macro? Well, I don't know exactly where the line is in all cases, but it's obvious there is a line. See, evolution is a religious worldview when you get above microevolution. Nobody's ever observed any macroevolution. Evolution is a religion because its followers believe that it can violate the laws of thermodynamics, the first and second laws. They ascribe to evolution, this mystical force that they call evolution. They give it the same power that we give to God. Evolution knows what it wants, or evolution directs things to happen, or evolution can overcome the laws that we see in nature, like the first and second laws of thermodynamics. So it gives evolution, which is its God actually, the power to create the universe and to create life. Evolution calls for faith in all sorts of things. You have to believe matter created itself. You have to believe matter can come to life and then learn to reproduce and then change from one kind to another. All of that stuff is purely taken on faith. There's no evidence for that whatsoever. Thirdly, members who no longer believe in evolution will be excommunicated. I mean, if you stop believing this theory, you will lose your job. And there are many professors and teachers in school who have become critical of evolution theory and have lost their job. It just is, it's discrimination. It happens all across the country, though. Fourthly, only members in good standing, then, are considered worthy of judgment, and therefore, if you don't believe in evolution, you're not worthy of judgment, so all those worthy of judgment believe in evolution. That sounds like Soviet style to me. A teacher gets up in the Soviet Union 10 years ago and says, kids, I don't believe in communism anymore. Well, he's going to lose his job or his life. And then they can survey all the teachers and say, how many believe in communism? And of course, they all raise their hand. And they'll say, see, kids, all the teachers believe in communism. Therefore, it must be true. That's a Russian-style ballot, what we've got here in America, when it comes to evolution. Because if a teacher stands up against the evolution theory, they are likely to lose their job, or certainly their government grants. Their financing will dry up. Ask Robert Gentry what happened to him at Oak Ridge Laboratories when he started publishing information against the evolution theory. Evolution tries to answer the basic questions to life, like who are we, why are we here, where did we come from, where are we going when we die. It does the same thing any other religion does. It answers the 4 basic questions to life. And evolution is often deified. If you look in literature dealing with the subject, you'll see the word evolution is capitalized, as if it is God of some kind, and it's certainly not. Evolutionists like to focus the discussion on microevolution because that's all there are is examples from microevolution. There are thousands of examples of that. You know, dogs produce a variety of dogs, and they'll say, see, evolution happens. No, microevolution happens. Variations happen, but that doesn't extend any farther than that. And they keep focusing on examples from microevolution because they want to draw the attention away from the fact that there is no evidence for any of the rest of them. They are all pure religion. So I get all sorts of letters and phone calls and emails from folks that are upset with me because I try to include the other 5 in with evolution theory. And they'll say, well, evolution doesn't deal with the origin of life. Evolution doesn't deal with the Big Bang. Okay, if that's really what you mean, then why don't you help me get that stuff out of the textbooks? See, they don't want to help get it out of the textbooks. They like it in there because it kind of helps, you know, foster what they believe, but it's certainly not part of science. Okay, the textbooks teach 20 billion years ago there was a Big Bang where nothing exploded and produced everything. And then about 4.6 billion years ago the Earth cooled down, developed a hard rocky crust, and it rained on the rocks for millions of years and turned them into soup. This textbook says, as the Earth formed, the surface was hot like the moon, and there were large pools of bubbling lava, and then it rained on the rocks and formed the oceans. And swirling in the waters of the oceans is a bubbling broth of complex chemicals, this textbook says. Progress from a complex chemical soup to a living organism is very slow. Well, I guess it is. It's totally stopped. Doesn't happen at all. But they believe non-living material came alive about 3 billion years ago. This textbook says the first self-replicating systems must have emerged in this organic soup. Now here we have systems that are able to replicate, in other words, reproduce themselves. And they say, well, it must have emerged. You've got to watch that word emerged. It occurs all through the textbooks. It means nothing. They'll say, man emerged on the African continent. What do you mean, emerged? Oozed out of a rock or something? How did this happen? That's not science to say self-replicating systems must have emerged in this organic soup. That is meaningless. So they teach, you know, life appeared in the rocks from the soup about 3 billion years ago. And I oftentimes, they'll say, do you think all the dogs could come from 2 dogs on Noah's Ark? And I say, well, do you believe all the dogs in the world came from a rock? Which is precisely what they believe. See, jumping from microevolution, which is observable, to macroevolution takes a giant leap of faith and logic. Nobody's ever seen any of this happen at all. There's a variety of dogs, and they might have had a common ancestor, and it was a dog. Macroevolution is imagination. It's based on imagination. It's a fantasy. It didn't happen. But they try to always argue, where's the line between micro and macro? I don't know. In every case, I mean, in some cases it's obvious, and I think maybe discovering where the line is a good field of research for science. But to give examples of micro and therefore assume that all the rest go together is not a good pursuit for science. That is a pursuit for religionists, those who want to believe in evolution. That's perfectly fine. So the teachers give the kids examples of one and try to make them believe in the other. In advertising, it is called bait and switch. If I ran an ad in the paper that said, new Mercedes, $10, how many of you would line up to come get the car? Everybody, right? Suppose when you arrived at the door, I said, well, you know, it's actually $99,000. We sold the $10 one. Well, no, hold it. If I run an ad, new Mercedes, $10, I better have a new Mercedes for $10. If I don't, it's illegal. It's called bait and switch advertising. I baited you to get you to come into the store, and then I switched it on you for something else. People go to jail for this bait and switch advertising. But that's exactly what's happening in the textbooks. So students are given one example, one definition of the word evolution, And then once they get them to believe in it, by giving them examples of microevolution, they will switch it to try to include all the rest of them. And by then the kid is hooked and doesn't realize he has been brainwashed. Look at this textbook. It says evolution is change over time. Ooh, now there's one definition. Now watch how they narrow it down though. Down here in the center part, it says, in other words, there is no doubt that living things have changed over time. Ooh, now we're clear down to part 5 of our 6 parts of evolution. They've already bypassed Big Bang. They've already bypassed the stellar evolution, the chemical evolution, the origin of life. Now they're just saying living things have changed over time. Well, what happened to the first 4? See, they switched it on them. Then you go to another page here and it says, evolution is defined as a change in species over time. Oh, now they've narrowed it down again. Now they're changing within the species. Well, I agree with that. See, they're giving a definition of evolution. They keep changing the definition. If evolution is really a change in species over time, then let's get the Big Bang out of the textbook. And let's get origin of life out of the textbook, because that's not part of this. That's how they bait and switch the kids every time. Students are given examples from microevolution, and then the real meaning is slipped in, like they try to talk about cosmic evolution and organic evolution. And then they have the gall to tell the students, if you don't believe in evolution, you don't understand science. I get this all the time. They'll say, Hovind, you don't understand science. I think I do understand science. Science means knowledge, things that we know, we can observe, we can test, we can demonstrate. Evolution is none of those. It's not knowledge, it's belief. And if you want to believe it, fine. Just don't call it science, that's all. See, we observe lots of variations, and variations certainly happen, but they have limits. Haven't the farmers been trying to get bigger pigs? Doesn't every farmer want to breed the biggest pig he can get? Assuming he's raising the pigs for sale. Okay, do you think there's a limit to the size? Do you think they'll ever get a pig as big as Texas? No, I bet there's a limit in there somewhere, right? I'm not sure exactly where the limit is, but it's somewhere less than the size of Texas, and maybe a little bigger than they are now. I don't know if you get a 1,000-pound hog or not, but you might get a 1,200-pounder someday, or a 1,400-pounder, but you never get a 4-billion-ton hog. Okay, there's a limit. Variations happen, but there are limits. And the farther you get from the norm, the more problems you have, the more you got to babysit the thing. If you turn them 1,000-pound hogs loose back in the woods, they won't survive. Nature would select against them surviving. There's an optimum size for different climates. Natural selection works, but it has nothing to do with evolution. Roaches eventually become resistant to pesticides. You spray pesticides on a bunch of roaches and 99.99% of them die. Well, the 0.01% that lives is going to then produce the next generation of roaches, obviously. And now, out of those kids, maybe half of them die from the pesticide because half of them inherited a resistance. Okay, that happens. And then eventually you can get a whole population of roaches that are resistant to a particular pesticide. Okay, it's still a roach. And the variation, the information for the variation was already in the gene pool. See, roaches might become resistant to pesticides, but they'll never become resistant to a sledgehammer. There's a limit to the resistance. And they produce the same kind of plant or animal. Variations are still the same kind. When you get into a discussion on evolution, I recommend you don't use the word species. Stick with the word kind. The biblical kind were those that originally were able to reproduce and produce a viable offspring. At one of the aquariums, they have the whalpin, a cross between a killer whale and a dolphin. Well, I don't know if a killer whale and a dolphin came from the same kind or not. They might originally have been one kind of animal that diversified into killer whales and dolphins. I don't know. They certainly are interfertile under special conditions. So I don't know exactly where the line is in every case between what is a kind. And that would be a good field for research. But the fact that we don't know where the line is doesn't mean there isn't a line. And it doesn't mean the biblical definition is not correct. Those that originally were able to reproduce after their kind. See, the information for the variation has to already be present in the gene pool. Maybe you heard about the guys that were trying to find the Northwest Passage across Canada to get to, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Turns out there isn't one, but they were looking for it. And some of the guys got caught up in there and froze. Well, they dug up the bodies and found out these guys were resistant to penicillin. Well, penicillin hadn't been invented yet. So the resistance to penicillin is already in the gene code someplace. And some people have it, some don't. Like some people can roll their tongue and some can't. I can't, okay? That's just something that's in the gene code. And it's not something that's added or taken away. It's just you can select for that. If you killed everybody that couldn't roll their tongue every 20 years, you killed everybody that couldn't roll their tongue, eventually you'd get a whole population of tongue rollers. Okay, they're still people. That's not evolution. That's variation. Now, the gene pool of the new variety is always more limited. Somebody spent years crossbreeding dogs to develop the Chihuahua. Imagine that, all that work to make a dog that is 100% useless. Turn all the Chihuahuas loose back into the woods and tell me how long they'll last. They'd run up to the wolf, yip, 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 crunch, end of gene pool. They wouldn't survive. You have to babysit them. You got to protect them because they can't protect themselves. So that is an example of artificial selection where man selected a particular trait and kept selecting and selecting and ended up with a Great Dane or a Chihuahua or whatever. That's natural. That's artificial selection, and it works with some pretty wild varieties. But they're still a dog. They still have the genes for dog, and they're still interfertile. Genetic information is always lost, not added, when you get a variation like that that is selected either by artificial or natural selection. Some information is lost. I come from Illinois, corn country. They have so many kinds of corn up there, they have to number them. You drive down the highway and you'll see, you know, BX65, don't mix it up with XL29, something will blow up. But you can crossbreed your corn from now to the cows come home, and you always get corn. You will never get a hamster or a tomato or a whale to grow on that corn stalk. It's not going to happen. See, variations happen within the kind, and that's all we ever observe. There's a variety of dogs, and they might have had a common ancestor. It was a dog. It could be that the horse and the zebra had a common ancestor. I wouldn't argue with that. But it looks like a horse. I mean, stand back and look at it. Okay, it's the same kind of animal. There's varieties of cows, and they probably had a common ancestor, and it was a cow. There are all kinds of varieties, but they're limited at that. Okay, and you have to stress that. If somebody says, we've got evidence for evolution, they'll always give you an example of microevolution. Always. Never anything beyond that. No animal changing from one kind into another. See, what happened, Hutton wrote his book in the late 1700s, 1795, and that book began to take away the idea of a 6,000-year Earth. People began to believe the Earth is millions of years old, or at least, you know, hundreds of thousands of years old in 1795. And then along came Charlie Lyell and wrote this book, Principles of Geology, and he took away the flood. After people read this book, they said, wow, maybe those layers weren't formed by a flood. Maybe they're formed by, you know, millions of years of slow accumulation. And this book really changed people's worldview. And then along came Charlie Darwin and wrote this book, The Origin of Species, and he took away the creator. Everybody started thinking, well, you know, maybe we got here without a creator. Maybe evolution is how it happened. And boy, people's worldview was changed. And those three false teachings are still in textbooks today. They're still teaching the Earth is millions of years old. They're still teaching today's processes created the Earth and created the canyons and all the features we see. And it avoids the obvious use of catastrophes to create these things. And they're still teaching evolution occurs. That stuff's in textbooks right now in your county and my county. The Bible warned us about science that is falsely so-called. Now, I like science, and I've got tons of science books. But science that is falsely so-called, that's where evolution fits in. It is called science, but it should not be called science. It's actually a religious worldview. There is no scientific evidence to back it up. And even Christians that go to college and learn this stuff have their faith destroyed. This professor said, as were many persons from Alabama, I was a born-again Christian. When I was 15, I entered the Southern Baptist Church with great fervor and interest in the fundamentalist religion. I left at 17 when I got to the University of Alabama and heard about evolution theory. And that professor now teaches at Harvard University and destroys the faith of thousands of other kids who come through his class. Because he went off to school unprepared to handle the evolution philosophy that was going to be crammed down his throat, and he believed it. Especially at 17, you got to figure the hormones develop faster than the brain. Satan knows to get the kids the first couple years of college because they kind of like an idea to get away from God anyway, you know, and the restrictions of the Christian fundamentalist religion. you know, thou shalt not commit adultery and stealing and lying and all these kind of stuff. And you know, all of a sudden it's, you know, it's pretty nice to not have a God telling you what to do, especially in a prosperous country like America. Nobody wants, you know, restrictions on their lifestyle because there's so many opportunities to sin. And as you know, the Bible says there's pleasure in sin for a season. That season will come to an end, and then you got to reap what you sowed. Do you know 75% of all the kids that go from Christian homes to secular universities, public schools, and universities will lose their faith after 1 year of college? I remember my freshman year at Illinois Central College. I had teachers who thought it was their duty in life to destroy my faith as a Christian. And it was a trial and a struggle. And if you go to a secular college, I guarantee you'll have at least one, probably several, but you'll have some teachers who just think it's their duty in life to ruin your faith. And they've got all their pet questions they'll ask you, you know, can God make a rock so big you can't lift it, and all this kind of stuff, you know. If God is good, why is there evil in the world? And all these questions have been answered years ago. But they'll bring them up to the freshman who doesn't have an answer, and the kid goes home and, you know, starts to lose his confidence in God's Word. And then, of course, he's away from home, and he's got the peer pressure of his friends who are drinking and, you know, have premarital sex and all this kind of stuff, and it just it destroys a large percentage of them. Now, as much as I like science, and there's an awful lot of good science in these books, there's some poison in there. Kids love to learn. I mean, that's normal. I think it's a God-given trait where people want to learn. I like to learn things, okay? But what are we teaching them anyway? Everybody tries to convert others to believe like they believe. I'm working to get you converted to believe like I believe. I believe the Bible is the infallible, inspired, inerrant Word of God. I believe we're going to be judged one day before God, and you better get right with God or you're going to hell if you're not saved. And if you are saved, you better keep your heart right with God or you're going to be punished by your Heavenly Father. I believe the Bible teaches that, okay? So I believe that. And I'm trying to convert you. The Bible says, knowing the terror of the Lord, we persuade men. But it would not be right for me to try to convert you to my belief and lie to you in order to change your mind. That would be wrong. That would be criminal. What's happening in our textbooks, some people want the kids to believe in evolution theory, but they lie to them to get them to believe the theory. You know, if I told you 20 billion years ago there was a Big Bang, you people would say, wait a minute, where's your evidence for this? If I said 4.6 billion years ago the earth cooled down, somebody's going to say, hey, where's the evidence for this? If I said life come from non-living material, where's the evidence for it? You have to give the kids some evidence. You got to make them believe. What evidence do they give for evolution theory? Well, let's talk about a few of these things here. Students are taught, here's a typical chapter from a textbook. It says we have evidence of evolution from fossils. We have evidence from structure, evidence from molecular biology. How we determine the age of fossils. We have evidence from development. This is what they show the kids. They're going to try to present them some evidence. Now we're going to spend quite a bit of time looking at the evidence that is presented and how it doesn't really hold up to scientific inquiry. It's outdated, false information. It's been proven wrong a long time ago, but they still keep it in the books today to try to get the kids to believe in this silly theory. Then they tell the kids the theory of evolution is based upon natural selection. Now let's just discuss all this here. Evolution theory is basically based upon two faulty assumptions. Number one, they assume that a mutation will make something new. And then number two, they assume that natural selection will make the good ones survive and take over the whole population. See, in order for evolution to work, one animal has to get a little better than the rest of them, and the rest of them have to die. I mean, evolution is suffering and death and cruelty. Not at all the way God would make things, not the God that I would want to worship anyway. People say, couldn't God use evolution? Well, I'm sure he could, but he didn't, and he wouldn't. That's a stupid, retarded God that has to use evolution to get us here. If you believe God used evolution to get us here, you've got the wrong God. You ought to trade him in for the real one, the almighty, all-powerful God of the universe. You ought to trade that God in. So they're going to say, mutations will make something new. Well, let's talk about this. Mutations certainly happen. This picture shows a bunch of roses. The textbook says, mutations are the original source of variation in populations. Okay, I agree. You know, the original rose only had 5 petals. It looked kind of like a daisy. And then, you know, the rose we have today is a mutant variety. Probably many folks wouldn't even recognize a real rose if they saw one. They've only seen the mutant roses. Somebody capitalized on this, you know, pretty looking rose with all these petals curling up. And today we have all sorts of variations of roses. There's white ones and pink ones and yellow ones and red ones and, you know, multicolored ones and big ones and little ones and, you know, teacup roses and all this. But they're still a flower. That's not evolution. Yes, variations happen, and yes, mutations happen. But even people who believe in evolution, like Pierre Grass will tell you, mutations do not produce any kind of evolution. And again, you got to define this word evolution. They don't produce any kind of macroevolution, none whatsoever. Here's a picture of a 5-legged bull. He can't run any faster. Now, this bull is a mutant. He did not get any new information. The gene code to the bull already contains the information to make a leg. It just built one in the wrong place, that's all. It didn't give him a wing or a feather or a beak. It gave him an extra leg, so there's not new information, there is only scrambled information. Some people write me letters and say, I've got proof for evolution, and they give an example of polyploidy, which is where a plant particularly will double the number of chromosomes. And you end up with giant strawberries or giant fruit of some kind because it's exactly double the number of chromosomes. That's not any new information. It's a copy of information that's already existing. That's not evolution. Nothing new's been added, and it's still a strawberry. No, I'm sorry, that is not evolution. And in nature, probably wouldn't survive. Not generation after generation anyway, it wouldn't make it. Here's a picture of a short-legged sheep. Notice what the textbook says. This mutation would not last in nature. Well, of course not, man. He's the first one the wolf is going to catch. Go, boys, go. Here comes the wolf. Oh, Herman didn't make it. See, mutations happen, but they deal with information that's already present, and it diminishes the amount of information. The sheep already had a gene pool code to tell him how to make legs. It just made them shorter. It didn't give him wings. It didn't give him a beak. It didn't give him a bigger brain where he could think like a human. It gave him shorter legs, and he already had legs. And that's supposed to be an example of evolution. Well, that's an example of a mutation. Certainly mutations happen, but that's where they stop. They don't do anything. Here's a 2-headed turtle. That's a mutant. It's not ninja, just a mutant turtle. If you've seen the TV series about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or something like that, you'll appreciate that. But 2-headed turtle is a mutant, and it's not helpful. He's going to freeze first winter. Nobody makes a double-neck turtleneck sweater. They just aren't going to survive. Okay. A mutation is a scrambling of information that's already existing. I remember as a kid, every Christmas we'd get together with the family and we would play games around the Christmas tree or around the stockings or something. And we would say, who can make up the most words from the word Christmas? And you pick out the letters and rearrange them, and you can get, has, Matt, Sam, Christ, Ram, all sorts of, probably hundreds of words can be obtained from just scrambling the letters that are already existing in the word Christmas. But you're never going to get Xerox or zebra or queen. The letters aren't available. And that's what a mutation does. A mutation will scramble information that's already existing, but it's not going to give you any new information. It doesn't create anything new. It just scrambles what you had. It's not going to help at all for evolution. This textbook shows a picture of a mutant fly. Now look carefully what they said here. Normal fruit flies have 2 wings. This mutant has 4. This rare mutation, like most mutations, is harmful. Beneficial mutations are the raw material for natural selection. Well, now hold on a second. Why would they show us a harmful mutation and then tell us that beneficial mutations are the raw material for natural selection? Why didn't they show us a beneficial mutation? You know why they didn't show a beneficial mutation? Because nobody's ever seen one. There are no beneficial mutations. They don't exist. One guy said, we've got beneficial mutations because sickle cell anemia is a beneficial mutation. If you get sickle cell anemia in Africa, then you can't get malaria. Oh. Well, that's probably true, okay. But you can die from malaria or you can die from sickle cell anemia. So to say that sickle cell anemia is a beneficial mutation because you can't get malaria is like saying, if you cut off your legs, you can't get athlete's foot. Well, that's true, but you need your legs, okay? That's not a beneficial mutation. And if that's the best example you've got for a mutation being something beneficial, you're in sad shape if you're trying to prove we all came from a rock. If that's the best example you can give is the sickle cell example, you got a problem, okay? You got a silly philosophy. You ought to change what you believe, okay? This textbook says evolution and natural selection go together. Whole chapter on it. It says, natural selection causes evolution. Well, now hold it. Natural selection certainly happens. We have no argument with that. The creationists thought of it first. Natural selection is what is called a conservative process. It doesn't create anything new. It conserves the species or kind as it is. Natural selection weeds out the inferiors and keeps defective organisms from taking over the population. Natural selection works. I got no argument with that. It has nothing to do with evolution, though. It's not going to cause any new kind of animal. This textbook says natural selection can only act on biologic properties that already exist. It cannot create properties in order to meet adaptational needs. There have been many times when I needed a third arm when I was building a house. It'd be nice to hold the board and hold the hammer and know how do I get the nail out. Okay? But just because I feel the need for one is not going to create one. It'd be nice to have wings. Many times I wish I had wings. I could fly someplace, get there faster, get out of a traffic jam. But the fact that I feel this need for them is not going to create them. And it'd be nice to have an eye in the back of your head to see the kids when they're playing when you're busy working. Okay, that'd be nice. A lot of moms would wish they had an eye in the back of the head. But needing one and feeling the need for it very strongly is not going to create it. It has to be in the genetic information. See, natural selection is sort of like a quality control. If you worked in a factory that produced cars, I worked at General Motors, okay? And when I worked there at General Motors, we built trucks. GM Truck and Coach Plant, Pontiac, Michigan. Plant number 6. If I'm working on the assembly line, building these trucks, and when they get to the end of the assembly line, somebody checks them. You know, kick the tires, slam the door, make sure it starts, drive it around, and look for defects. That's normal. Almost any factory that produces any complex item has a quality control. Before it goes out the door, you check it. That's common sense. Suppose these trucks are going through, or suppose you work in a Fisher Body, or you work in General Motors or someplace and you're building cars. And your job is to check every car that comes by and look for defects. If you find a defect and it's very serious, you reject it. That's what natural selection does. The slowest rabbit's probably going to get caught by the fox or the wolf. So that keeps the species of rabbits fast. If all the slow ones survive, well then pretty soon the whole population would slow down. Yeah, that would happen. Sure, natural selection works. But it's still a rabbit. It doesn't change a thing. If you're working in this factory and your job is to check the cars coming out the line, and you take out every reject, how long would it take that process to change the car to an airplane? Oh, it never will. See, natural selection doesn't change the animal or plant to something else. And quality control doesn't change the car to an airplane. Design engineering changes the car to an airplane. Natural selection is God's quality control. That's all it is. And survival of the fittest certainly happens. Generally. It's not a really good word, okay, a good phrase. Survival of the fittest certainly, though, does not explain arrival of the fittest. The fact that the fastest rabbits generally survive doesn't tell you how the rabbits came to be. It doesn't help you at all explaining how the rabbits came to be. And survival of the fittest is what is often called a tautology. That is a sentence that means nothing. I'll show you how it works. Ask a professor, say, excuse me, sir, could you please tell me why this one survived? They say, well, because it's the fittest. Oh, question, how do you know it's the fittest? Well, because it survived. Oh, I see. That's why it's called a tautology. It's a useless phrase. Yes, I'll go along with probably generally the strongest survive, okay, but that has nothing to do with evolution whatsoever. If a whale goes through a school of fish and eats 80% of them, it's not survival of the fittest. It's called survival of the luckiest. And that's what really happens. Survival of the fittest, it's a useless phrase, okay? Probably because of natural pressures, the strongest in certain areas will survive, or the fastest, or the smartest, or whatever. But it doesn't change it to something else. It's still the same kind. And you have to keep that thought in mind. Okay, next week we'll take up where we left off, talking about more about Charlie Darwin's book and some of the examples they give today in the textbooks for evolution, and all of which have been proven wrong. And this is the kind of information that will help students that have to go to public school. We'll cover that next week.